Welcome to Sleepy Science Odyssey. Tonight, the subconscious, the vast realm of mental processes operating beneath conscious awareness, from automatic habits that guide daily behavior to implicit memories that shape reactions without recall, from subliminal perceptions that influence decisions to emotional associations formed outside awareness, from the hidden biases affecting judgments to the unconscious skills that enable expert performance. We'll explore what science reveals about the mind's hidden depths, how unconscious processes interact with conscious thought, and why understanding the subconscious matters for understanding ourselves. If you're new here, this channel is for people who need something to think about before they can stop thinking. Real psychological science, no exaggeration, just quiet facts in the dark. Let's begin. The majority of mental processing occurs outside conscious awareness, with unconscious processes handling most routine cognitive tasks. Consciousness, the subjective awareness of thoughts, perceptions, and experiences, represents only a small fraction of total mental activity. The vast majority of cognitive processing occurs unconsciously, beneath the threshold of awareness, with unconscious systems handling everything from basic perception and motor control to complex decision-making and emotional responses. This division of labor between conscious and unconscious processing reflects the brain's solution to fundamental constraints on information processing. Consciousness has severely limited capacity, able to process only tiny amounts of information simultaneously, while unconscious processes operate massively in parallel, handling enormous information volumes without the bottlenecks that limit conscious thought. The relationship between conscious and unconscious processing has been conceptualized in various ways throughout psychology's history. Sigmund Freud's psychoanalytic theory emphasized the unconscious as a repository of repressed desires, traumatic memories, and primitive drives that influence behavior while remaining hidden from awareness, requiring special techniques like dream analysis and free association to access. While many of Freud's specific claims lack empirical support, and psychoanalysis has diminished influence in contemporary psychology, the core insight that unconscious processes profoundly influence behavior remains central to modern psychological science, though understood through different frameworks. Cognitive psychology views the unconscious not as a dark reservoir of repressed content, but as a vast parallel processing system executing well-learned routines, perceptual analyses, memory retrieval, and decision-making outside awareness. This cognitive unconscious performs the routine operations, allowing conscious attention to focus on novel or demanding tasks, while automated processes handle familiar situations efficiently. When you walk, talk, read, or perform any well-practiced skill, unconscious processes control most execution, leaving consciousness free to monitor outcomes and intervene when necessary. The extent of unconscious processing becomes apparent when considering basic perception. Looking at a scene, you consciously experience a unified, coherent visual world, but this experience results from massive unconscious processing that extracts edges, detects motion, recognizes objects, constructs three-dimensional structure from two-dimensional retinal images, and integrates information across eye movements. All this computation occurs unconsciously, presenting to consciousness only the final result, the perception of objects in space. Similarly, language comprehension involves unconscious parsing of grammar, accessing word meanings from memory, and integrating semantic information into coherent interpretations, with consciousness receiving only the comprehended meaning while remaining unaware of these complex operations. Memory retrieval demonstrates the same principle. When answering, "What did you have for breakfast?" the answer simply appears in consciousness without awareness of the search process consulting memory stores. You don't consciously examine your episodic memory system, compare timestamps, or verify source. These operations occur automatically, delivering the answer to consciousness as if by magic. This automaticity extends to most cognitive operations, with conscious awareness limited to inputs, outputs, and occasional awareness of difficulties requiring conscious problem-solving when automatic processes fail. The distinction between automatic and controlled processing captures this division. Automatic processes are fast, parallel, effortless, unconscious, and inflexible, operating whenever their triggering conditions occur without requiring attention or intention. Controlled processes are slow, serial, effortful, conscious, and flexible, requiring attention and intention, but allowing novel responses tailored to specific situations. Reading demonstrates this. For skilled readers, recognizing words is automatic. Seeing cat automatically activates the word's meaning without effort or intention. But comprehending complex sentences requires controlled processing, allocating attention to syntax, resolving ambiguities, and integrating information with context. The transition from controlled to automatic processing occurs through practice. Initially, novel tasks require conscious attention monitoring each step, but with repetition, performance gradually becomes automatic, shifting from slow, effortful, conscious execution to fast, effortless, unconscious execution. Learning to drive illustrates this. Beginners consciously attend to every action, checking mirrors, adjusting speed, steering, but experienced drivers perform these operations automatically while consciously thinking about conversations, navigation, or other topics. This automatization through practice is fundamental to skill acquisition across domains from sports to music to professional expertise. However, automatization has costs. Automatic processes are inflexible, continuing to execute in triggering situations even when inappropriate. The Stroop effect demonstrates this. Naming the ink color of color words is slower when word and ink mismatch, the word red in blue ink, because automatic word reading interferes with controlled color naming. Decades of reading practice have made word recognition so automatic that it cannot be inhibited even when counterproductive, illustrating that automaticity trades flexibility for efficiency. Implicit learning, acquiring knowledge without awareness, further demonstrates unconscious processing capabilities. People learn complex patterns in sequences, grammars, and other structured information through mere exposure, improving performance without consciously noticing the patterns they've learned. Artificial grammar learning studies expose participants to strings generated by complex rules, then test recognition of new strings following the same rules. Participants reliably distinguish grammatical from ungrammatical strings better than chance despite being unable to articulate the rules they've learned, indicating unconscious learning and memory. Procedural memory, memory for skills and procedures, is largely unconscious. Once acquired, skills like riding bicycles, typing, or playing musical instruments are executed without conscious access to the detailed knowledge guiding performance. Expert typists cannot consciously report keyboard layouts despite using them daily, and their fingers move automatically to correct keys without conscious deliberation. This dissociation between conscious and unconscious knowledge is adaptive, allowing conscious thought to focus on goals while unconscious processes handle implementation details. The unconscious also generates much creative thought. Solutions to problems often arrive in consciousness spontaneously after periods of unconscious processing. Anecdotes describe scientists and artists reporting insights arriving during dreams, baths, or walks, situations where conscious attention has moved away from problems, allowing unconscious processes to work. While such anecdotes are difficult to verify, experimental studies show incubation effects where breaks improve problem-solving, particularly for insight problems requiring restructuring initial representations. Whether breaks help through unconscious processing, mental rest, or forgetting misleading approaches remains debated, but clearly not all productive thinking requires conscious effort. The dual process framework distinguishes two types of thinking. Type 1 processes are fast, automatic, unconscious, and associative, operating through pattern recognition and learned associations. Type 2 processes are slow, controlled, conscious, and rule-based, operating through logical reasoning and deliberate analysis. Most behavior reflects both types interacting, with Type 1 processes generating intuitive responses that Type 2 processes may accept, modify, or override. This framework explains phenomena like cognitive biases, systematic errors, where intuitive Type 1 responses mislead and Type 2 monitoring fails to correct them. Priming demonstrates that unconscious exposure to stimuli influences subsequent thoughts, feelings, and behaviors. Priming refers to effects where exposure to stimuli influences responses to subsequent stimuli, typically without awareness of the influence. These effects, demonstrated in thousands of studies across decades, reveal that unconscious processing of information affects cognition and behavior in powerful yet subtle ways. Priming occurs across diverse domains including perception, memory, language, decision-making, and social behavior, illustrating the pervasive influence of unconscious processes. Perceptual priming improves perception of previously encountered stimuli. Briefly viewing a word or object facilitates subsequent identification even when the initial exposure is subliminal, too brief for conscious perception. Repetition priming, where repeated items are processed faster and more accurately than new items, occurs even when participants don't consciously remember the previous exposure, demonstrating unconscious memory influencing perception. This implicit memory, revealed through performance benefits without conscious recollection, operates independently from explicit memory, requiring conscious recall. Semantic priming shows that processing a word facilitates processing semantically related words. After seeing doctor, people recognize nurse faster than unrelated words because spreading activation in semantic memory automatically activates related concepts. This occurs even when the prime is masked, presented so briefly that participants cannot report what they saw, indicating that semantic processing begins unconsciously before reaching awareness. The magnitude and duration of semantic priming effects provide windows into semantic memory structure and processing dynamics. Conceptual priming influences thoughts and judgments. Exposing people to concepts like achievement or cooperation subtly shifts their thinking toward those themes, affecting unrelated subsequent tasks. Studies show that reading words related to rudeness increases interrupting behavior, while words related to politeness reduce interruptions, effects occurring without awareness of the influence. However, many such behavioral priming effects have failed to replicate in recent large-scale studies, raising questions about robustness and suggesting that some published effects may reflect publication bias or methodological issues rather than genuine phenomena. Effective priming demonstrates that emotional valence of stimuli influences responses to subsequent stimuli. Briefly presenting positive or negative images or words facilitates responses to similarly valenced targets while interfering with oppositely valenced targets. Seeing a happy face speeds recognition of positive words, while seeing an angry face speeds recognition of negative words. These effects occur at very short intervals, under 300 milliseconds, suggesting automatic effective processing that consciousness accesses only after unconscious evaluation has occurred. Goal priming shows that activating goal-related concepts unconsciously instigates goal pursuit. Priming achievement-related words increases persistence on difficult tasks. Priming cooperation words increases cooperative behavior in economic games. These effects reportedly occur without conscious awareness of being primed or connecting the prime to behavior, suggesting goals can be triggered and pursued unconsciously. However, as with behavioral priming generally, replication failures have raised concerns about reliability, with ongoing debate about which priming effects are robust versus which reflect false positives. Subliminal perception, processing stimuli below conscious threshold, has controversial history. Early claims that subliminal messages in advertising could manipulate purchasing lacked evidence and were largely debunked, but rigorous laboratory studies do demonstrate genuine subliminal effects, though typically smaller than conscious effects and context-dependent. Subliminal presentation of emotional faces influences affective judgments. Subliminal presentation of action-related words influences motor responses. Subliminal presentation of numbers influences magnitude judgments. These effects are real but constrained, with subliminal stimuli influencing only limited aspects of cognition and behavior rather than allowing powerful manipulation. The boundary between conscious and unconscious perception is not sharp but graded, varying with attention, stimulus strength, and neural state. Stimuli can be partially processed, activating some representations without reaching awareness. Inattentional blindness, failing to notice conspicuous stimuli when attention is engaged elsewhere, demonstrates that unattended stimuli may reach early processing stages without conscious perception. Change blindness, failing to notice large changes coinciding with disruptions, similarly shows limitations on what reaches awareness even when physically present in the environment. Masking, presenting stimuli briefly followed by pattern masks that interfere with perception, is standard technique for studying unconscious processing. Backward masking, where masks follow stimuli, disrupts conscious perception while allowing some unconscious processing. Forward masking, where masks precede stimuli, affects processing differently. Varying mask timing and characteristics allows investigating processing stages and consciousness thresholds, revealing that considerable stimulus analysis occurs before information reaches awareness. Individual differences in susceptibility to priming and unconscious influences exist, with some people showing larger effects than others. Differences may reflect attentional control, working memory capacity, motivation, or personality traits. Understanding these differences is important both scientifically, revealing mechanisms underlying unconscious influences, and practically, identifying who is most susceptible to particular influences could inform interventions. The practical implications of priming are debated. If subtle environmental cues influence important decisions unconsciously, this has implications for marketing, politics, public health, and other domains. However, the replication crisis affecting many behavioral priming findings suggests that earlier enthusiasm about applications was premature, and more rigorous evidence is needed before confidently recommending interventions based on priming research. Current consensus emphasizes that priming effects are real but smaller, more context-dependent, and less robust than initially believed. Methodologically, studying unconscious processes is challenging because demonstrating that processes are truly unconscious requires proving absence of awareness, which is difficult given that awareness is subjective and participants may have partial awareness they don't report. Sophisticated methods, including objective and subjective measures of awareness, signal detection analyses, and computational modeling, help address these challenges. But debates continue about criteria for demonstrating genuine unconscious processing versus partial conscious awareness. Implicit memory allows information to influence behavior without conscious recollection of learning. Memory is not unitary, but comprises multiple systems supported by different brain regions and operating under different principles. Explicit memory, conscious recollection of facts and events, is what most people mean by memory, but implicit memory, changes in behavior or performance resulting from past experience without conscious recollection, is equally important and more evolutionarily ancient. Implicit memory includes procedural memory for skills, priming effects, classical conditioning, and non-associative learning like habituation and sensitization. The dissociation between explicit and implicit memory became dramatically clear through studies of amnesiac patients, particularly patient HM, who underwent bilateral medial temporal lobe removal to treat epilepsy in 1953. The surgery eliminated his ability to form new explicit memories. He couldn't remember events after the surgery or learn new facts, but left implicit memory intact. HM improved on motor skills like mirror drawing across practice sessions, demonstrating learning, but each session he claimed never to have done the task before, demonstrating absence of explicit memory for the learning episodes. This double dissociation, impaired explicit memory with preserved implicit memory, revealed distinct memory systems. Priming, discussed earlier as unconscious influence, is a form of implicit memory where prior exposure facilitates subsequent processing without requiring conscious recollection. Perceptual priming improves identification of previously encountered stimuli even when participants don't remember seeing them. Conceptual priming influences conceptual processing without conscious memory of the source. These effects can last days or weeks, demonstrating durable memory despite absence of conscious recollection. Procedural memory for skills and procedures operates largely unconsciously. Learning motor skills like typing, playing instruments, or sports involves gradual tuning of motor programs through practice, with performance improvements occurring outside awareness. Participants often cannot verbalize what they've learned or how they perform skills, indicating implicit knowledge guiding behavior. Declarative knowledge, conscious knowledge that can be stated, and procedural knowledge, unconscious knowledge embedded in procedures, are distinct, with different neural substrates and different characteristics. Classical conditioning, where associations form between stimuli through temporal pairing, occurs largely unconsciously. Pavlov's dogs learned to salivate to bells paired with food without conscious deliberation about associations. Similarly, humans acquire conditioned emotional responses, preferences, and physiological reactions through conditioning, often without awareness of the contingencies. Fear conditioning, where neutral stimuli acquire fear-inducing properties through pairing with aversive events, occurs even when participants cannot consciously report the contingencies, though awareness may enhance conditioning strength. Evaluative conditioning, where neutral stimuli acquire positive or negative valence through pairing with liked or disliked stimuli, influences preferences and attitudes. Pairing neutral objects with positive images makes the objects more liked, while pairing with negative images makes them less liked. These effects can occur without awareness of the pairings and persist even when participants know the pairings were arbitrary, suggesting that evaluative conditioning creates automatic affective responses that conscious knowledge doesn't easily override. Implicit learning of complex patterns and regularities occurs through mere exposure to structured information. Serial reaction time tasks present sequences of stimuli requiring responses, with sequences following complex rules. Participants respond faster to rule-consistent sequences than random sequences, indicating learning, but cannot articulate the rules, indicating implicit knowledge. Artificial grammar learning similarly shows learning of complex syntactic patterns without awareness, with participants accurately classifying new strings as grammatical or ungrammatical while unable to explain the rules they're using. The distinction between familiarity and recollection captures different bases for recognition memory. Recollection involves consciously retrieving specific details about encountering items previously, remembering the context, thoughts, or perceptual details associated with learning. Familiarity involves sensing that items were encountered previously without recalling specific details, recognizing items as familiar but not remembering the learning episode. Familiarity can be considered a form of implicit memory because it reflects past experience influencing current processing, making items feel familiar without explicit retrieval of the experience. Source monitoring, determining the origins of memories, often fails despite accurate memory for information, indicating dissociation between knowing what and knowing where or when it was learned. People frequently remember facts without remembering how they learned them, or misattribute memories to wrong sources. Source amnesia, knowing information without knowing its source, is particularly common for information learned long ago, with the content persisting in memory while contextual details fade. This dissociation has practical importance because it allows misinformation to be remembered and influence judgments even when the source is forgotten or discredited. Implicit memory appears early in development, with infants showing recognition of familiar stimuli and habituation to repeated stimuli months before explicit memory emerges. This suggests implicit memory is phylogenetically and ontogenetically more primitive, developing earlier in evolution and in individual development. Infantile amnesia, the inability to recall events from early childhood, reflects the late development of explicit memory systems, particularly the hippocampus, which matures slowly, while implicit memory functions from birth or before. In aging, explicit memory typically declines, while implicit memory remains relatively preserved. Older adults show reduced recall and recognition of new information, but show normal priming and procedural learning. This dissociation has practical importance suggesting that learning in older adults can be enhanced by relying on implicit learning mechanisms rather than explicit instruction. Training procedures that rely on repetition and practice rather than explicit memorization may be particularly effective. Neurally, explicit memory depends on medial temporal lobe structures, including hippocampus and adjacent cortex, along with prefrontal cortex for strategic retrieval. Implicit memory depends on other structures depending on type. Procedural memory relies on basal ganglia and cerebellum. Priming relies on cortical regions processing the stimuli. Conditioning relies on amygdala for emotional associations and cerebellum for motor responses. These distinct neural substrates allow selective damage to impair one memory system while sparing others, as seen in amnesiac patients, Parkinson's patients with procedural deficits but preserved explicit memory, and Alzheimer's patients with severe explicit memory loss but relatively preserved procedural memory in early stages. Automaticity allows complex behaviors to be performed efficiently with minimal conscious attention. Much of daily behavior is automatic, executed with little conscious thought or intention. Walking, talking, driving, reading, and countless other skills are performed largely automatically, freeing conscious attention for other purposes. Understanding automaticity is crucial for understanding skilled performance, habit formation, and the interplay between conscious and unconscious control of behavior. Automatic processes have several defining characteristics. They are fast, occurring within hundreds of milliseconds, effortless, requiring minimal attention or mental resources, unconscious, operating without awareness, unintentional, triggered by stimuli rather than conscious goals, and difficult to control, operating even when counterproductive. These characteristics distinguish automatic from controlled processes, which are slow, effortful, conscious, intentional, and easily controlled. However, the boundary is not absolute, with processes varying continuously rather than falling into discrete categories. The development of automaticity follows predictable patterns. Initially, novel tasks require controlled processing with attention allocated to each component. With practice, individual components become automatic, reducing attention requirements and improving performance. Eventually, entire task sequences become automated, allowing execution with minimal attention, while accuracy and speed improve dramatically. This progression from controlled to automatic processing underlies skill acquisition across domains. The power law of practice describes how performance improves with practice. Initially, performance improves rapidly, but improvement rate decreases as practice continues, with performance improvements following logarithmic functions. This law holds across diverse tasks from simple reaction time to complex cognitive skills, suggesting common mechanisms underlying skill acquisition. The slowing improvement rate may reflect that easiest improvements occur first, while increasingly difficult refinements require increasing practice, or that early learning involves strategic changes, while later learning involves parameter tuning. Automatization allows multitasking by reducing attention requirements for individual tasks. Novices cannot perform two tasks simultaneously without severe interference, but experts can combine tasks that would be impossible for novices. Skilled pianists can play complex pieces while conversing, something impossible for beginners who must consciously attend to each note. Automatic task execution creates spare capacity, allowing simultaneous controlled processing of other information, though dual task costs typically persist even for highly practiced tasks. Attention can be withdrawn from automatic tasks without disrupting performance, though performance may suffer when conscious monitoring would detect and correct errors. Expert performance sometimes deteriorates when attention is directed to automatic processes, choking under pressure where explicit monitoring disrupts automatic execution. Athletes and musicians sometimes perform worse when consciously thinking about technique rather than trusting automatic processes developed through practice. This suggests optimal performance requires appropriate balance between automatic execution and conscious monitoring. Habit formation depends on automaticity, with repeated behaviors in consistent contexts gradually becoming automatic responses to contextual cues. Habits begin as goal-directed actions deliberately performed to achieve outcomes, but with repetition, contextual cues gain direct control over behavior, triggering actions automatically without conscious decision-making. Strong habits are difficult to change because contextual cues automatically trigger behaviors despite conscious intentions to change, explaining why changing unhealthy habits like smoking or overeating is difficult despite genuine motivation. The neuroscience of automaticity reveals shifts in brain activity as tasks become automatic. Initially, prefrontal cortex shows high activity reflecting controlled processing, attention allocation, and monitoring. With practice, prefrontal activity decreases while activity in motor and sensory cortices becomes more efficient and stereotyped. Basal ganglia activity increases, particularly in striatum, which is critical for habit learning. These shifts reflect transition from deliberate, flexible, controlled processing to efficient, rigid automatic processing. Automaticity can be maladaptive when automatic responses are inappropriate for current situations. The Stroop effect, difficulty naming ink colors when they mismatch word meanings, demonstrates interference from automatic word reading. Similarly, action slips, performing habitual actions when intending different actions, occur when automatic routines are triggered inappropriately. Adding sugar to coffee when intending to drink it black, or driving toward work when intending to go elsewhere, exemplify how automatic behaviors can override conscious intentions when attention lapses. Breaking unwanted automatic behaviors requires disrupting cue behavior associations and establishing new associations. Implementation intentions, specific plans for how to act in situations, can help by creating new automatic associations between situational cues and desired behaviors. Changing contexts can help by removing cues that trigger unwanted habits. Mindfulness, paying attention to automatic processes, can help by increasing awareness of automatic behaviors before they complete, allowing conscious intervention. Creativity may require reducing automaticity, allowing novel responses instead of default automatic responses. Training sometimes emphasizes avoiding automatic responses to encourage original thinking. Incubation effects in problem solving may partly reflect forgetting of automatic but incorrect approaches, allowing fresh perspectives. However, automaticity also supports creativity by freeing attention from routine operations, allowing focus on novel combinations and strategies. The efficiency of automatic processing has costs beyond inflexibility. Automatic processes can encode biases, stereotypes, and problematic associations that influence behavior unconsciously. Implicit biases, automatic associations between social groups and attributes, affect judgments and behaviors even when conflicting with explicit beliefs. Reducing such biases requires interventions targeting automatic associations rather than just changing conscious beliefs. Unconscious emotional processes influence decisions and behaviors before conscious awareness occurs. Emotions, though consciously felt, are generated and regulated partly through unconscious processes. Emotional responses often begin before conscious awareness, with physiological reactions, facial expressions, and behavioral tendencies emerging automatically before subjective feelings register in consciousness. Understanding unconscious emotional processing reveals how feelings influence cognition and behavior in ways we don't fully recognize. The somatic marker hypothesis, proposed by Antonio Damasio, suggests that emotional responses, somatic markers, guide decision-making unconsciously before conscious deliberation. Situations associated with past rewards or punishments evoke positive or negative bodily states that bias decisions toward or away from options. These markers operate unconsciously, influencing choices through felt hunches without explicit reasoning. Evidence includes findings that ventromedial prefrontal cortex damage, which impairs emotional processing, causes decision-making deficits despite intact logical reasoning. The Iowa gambling task demonstrates unconscious emotional learning influencing decisions. Participants choose from decks with different reward-punishment ratios, initially unaware of differences. Physiological measures show stress responses when reaching toward disadvantageous decks before participants consciously know these decks are bad, suggesting unconscious emotional learning guides choices before explicit knowledge develops. However, the interpretation and replicability of these findings are debated, with some arguing that subtle explicit knowledge, rather than purely unconscious processes, may explain performance. Implicit attitudes, automatic evaluations of objects, people, or concepts, are measured through tasks like the implicit association test, IAT, which assesses association strength between concepts by measuring response times in classification tasks. Participants classify words into categories, with faster responses indicating stronger automatic associations. For example, faster responses when pairing pleasant with flowers than with insects reveals automatic positive attitudes toward flowers. The IAT has been used extensively to measure implicit biases, though its predictive validity for behavior is debated. Affective reactions occur rapidly, with emotional brain regions, including amygdala, responding to emotional stimuli within milliseconds before conscious perception. Subliminal presentation of fearful faces activates amygdala despite participants not consciously seeing faces, demonstrating unconscious emotional processing. These rapid unconscious evaluations may prepare behavioral responses before conscious appraisal, providing evolutionary advantages in dangerous situations where delayed responses could be fatal. Facial expressions occur automatically in response to emotional stimuli, often before conscious awareness. Microexpressions, brief, involuntary expressions lasting fractions of a second, reveal genuine emotions people may be trying to conceal. These expressions occur too quickly for conscious control, providing windows into unconscious emotional states. Training can improve detection of microexpressions, though whether this improves lie detection or emotion recognition in real-world settings is questionable given small effect sizes and context dependency. Emotional contagion, automatically mimicking and synchronizing with others' emotional expressions and states, occurs unconsciously. Seeing others smile induces smiling. Seeing others in pain activates pain-related brain regions. This automatic mimicry facilitates empathy and social coordination, allowing rapid understanding and response to others' emotional states. Mirror neurons, which activate both when performing actions and observing others perform them, may mediate emotional contagion, though their role in human emotion is debated. Mood influences cognition unconsciously, with positive moods facilitating creative thinking, heuristic processing, and optimistic judgments, while negative moods promote systematic thinking, attention to details, and pessimistic judgments. These mood effects often occur without awareness that mood is influencing thought, with people attributing thoughts to objective assessment rather than recognizing mood's influence. Weather, music, ambient odors, and other subtle factors influence mood and consequently cognition without awareness. Affectaz information theory proposes that people use their affective states as information when making judgments. Feeling good leads to positive judgments. Feeling bad leads to negative judgments. Importantly, these influences occur when people misattribute their feelings to the judgment target rather than actual sources. Feeling anxious from caffeine may be misattributed to relationship concerns, amplifying those concerns. This misattribution demonstrates unconscious emotional influence on judgment. Emotional regulation, modifying emotional experiences and expressions, involves both conscious strategies like reappraisal and unconscious processes. Automatic emotion regulation occurs without conscious intention through attention deployment, where attention automatically avoids threatening information, and through suppression, where emotional expressions are automatically inhibited. These unconscious regulation processes can be adaptive, preventing emotional overload, or maladaptive, avoiding necessary emotional processing. Repression, a controversial concept from psychoanalysis, refers to unconsciously motivated forgetting of threatening memories or thoughts. While extreme claims about repressed traumatic memories have been criticized and linked to false memory creation, evidence suggests that motivated forgetting does occur, with people showing impaired memory for information threatening self-concept. Whether this reflects unconscious motivated repression or conscious avoidance followed by normal forgetting is debated. Anxiety and fear can be conditioned unconsciously, with neutral stimuli acquiring fear-inducing properties through pairing with threats even when participants aren't consciously aware of contingencies. Subliminal presentation of conditioned stimuli evokes fear responses despite no conscious perception. This unconscious fear conditioning may explain phobias and anxiety disorders, where fears seem irrational and resistant to conscious reasoning. The associations were formed unconsciously and cannot be easily modified through conscious thought. The subconscious processes language automatically, extracting meaning before conscious awareness. Language comprehension feels effortless, with meaning seemingly appearing directly in consciousness without intervening processing. However, this subjective immediacy belies massive unconscious processing that analyzes acoustic or visual input, accesses word meanings from memory, parses grammatical structure, integrates semantic and pragmatic information, and constructs interpretations. All this occurs unconsciously, presenting to consciousness only final comprehended meanings. Word recognition is highly automatic in skilled readers. Seeing printed words automatically activates their meanings, pronunciations, and grammatical properties within milliseconds, without intention or attention. The Stroop effect demonstrates this automaticity. Skilled readers cannot avoid reading words even when trying to ignore them to focus on ink colors. Decades of reading practice have made word recognition so automatic that inhibiting it is impossible, illustrating how thorough automatization can be. Lexical access, retrieving word meanings from mental lexicon, occurs unconsciously and rapidly. Multiple studies show that word meanings are accessed within 200 to 300 milliseconds of seeing words, faster than participants can consciously report seeing words. Brain imaging reveals that different brain regions process different aspects of word meaning, with sensorimotor regions activating for action words, visual regions for visual words, suggesting meaning access recruits distributed semantic networks unconsciously. Semantic priming reveals unconscious semantic processing. Seeing doctor facilitates processing nurse, because spreading activation in semantic networks unconsciously activates related concepts. This occurs even when participants don't consciously notice connections, indicating automatic semantic processing. The time course of semantic priming, strongest at short intervals, fading within seconds, provides evidence about semantic memory structure and activation dynamics. Syntactic processing, analyzing grammatical structure, occurs largely unconsciously. Readers automatically parse sentences, assigning grammatical roles to words, constructing hierarchical phrase structures, and resolving ambiguities using syntactic and semantic cues. Garden path sentences, sentences like "the horse raced past the barn fell," demonstrate unconscious parsing by causing difficulties when initial automatic parses are incorrect, requiring conscious reanalysis. Most syntactic processing, however, proceeds smoothly without conscious awareness of grammatical operations. Pragmatic processing, using context to interpret utterances, involves unconscious inference about speakers' intentions. Understanding sarcasm, metaphor, indirect requests, and conversational implicatures requires going beyond literal meanings to infer intended meanings from context. Much of this pragmatic reasoning occurs unconsciously, with listeners automatically computing intended meanings without awareness of inference processes. Only when pragmatic processing fails, when context is insufficient or misleading, does conscious reasoning become necessary. Speech perception involves unconscious construction of phonetic representations from acoustic input. Acoustic signals are highly variable and ambiguous, with same phonemes producing different acoustic patterns depending on context, speakers, and speaking rates. Listeners unconsciously compensate for this variability, categorizing sounds into phonemes automatically. Categorical perception, sharp boundaries between phoneme categories despite continuous acoustic variation, reflects unconscious perceptual learning shaping phonetic categories. Prediction during language comprehension occurs unconsciously, with readers and listeners generating expectations about upcoming words based on context. Brain activity shows prediction errors when unexpected words appear, with larger responses to unexpected than expected words. These predictions occur automatically and influence processing speed. Expected words are processed faster than unexpected words. Whether predictions are detailed, specifying particular words, or general, specifying semantic or syntactic features, is debated, but clearly comprehension involves unconscious anticipation. Language production similarly involves unconscious processes. Speakers select words, construct grammatical structures, and plan articulation largely unconsciously, with conscious awareness limited to communicative intentions and monitoring outcomes. Speech errors, slips of the tongue, provide evidence about unconscious production mechanisms. Error patterns reveal that sounds, words, and phrases are planned unconsciously before articulation, with errors reflecting competition between representations. Bilingualism reveals language control occurs largely unconsciously. Bilinguals must control which language to use, activating the target language while inhibiting the non-target language. This control operates automatically based on context, interlocutor, and topic, with language switching occurring unconsciously. However, controlling language requires cognitive resources, with costs observed in switching between languages. Lifelong bilingualism may enhance executive control generally, perhaps through constant practice controlling language selection. Reading acquisition transforms language processing from controlled to automatic. Beginning readers consciously sound out words, deliberately apply phonics rules, and effortfully integrate word meanings into sentence meanings. Skilled readers perform all this automatically, with comprehension occurring without conscious effort or awareness of processing. This transformation reflects learning and brain changes, with practice shifting processing from effortful phonological decoding to automatic orthographic recognition, engaging different brain regions. Unconscious language processing has practical implications. Subliminal presentation of words influences subsequent processing and behavior, with effects sometimes persisting despite no conscious perception. Masked priming, where briefly presented words are immediately masked, preventing conscious perception, still produces facilitation of semantically related targets. These effects demonstrate that considerable language processing, accessing meanings, activating related concepts, occurs unconsciously before information reaches awareness. Unconscious biases affect judgments and decisions despite conscious egalitarian beliefs. People like to believe their judgments and decisions reflect conscious values and rational deliberation, but substantial evidence shows that unconscious biases, automatic associations and preferences, influence cognition and behavior in ways that often conflict with conscious beliefs. Understanding unconscious bias is important both scientifically, revealing how automatic and controlled processes interact, and practically, addressing prejudice and discrimination requires interventions targeting both conscious and unconscious processes. Implicit biases are automatic associations between social groups and attributes, measured through various techniques, but most commonly through the implicit association test, IAT. The IAT measures association strength by comparing response times when pairing concepts in stereotype-consistent versus stereotype-inconsistent ways. For example, if participants respond faster when pairing young with good and old with bad than the reverse pairings, this suggests automatic associations between age and valence, reflecting age bias. Implicit bias research has documented widespread automatic biases related to race, gender, age, weight, disability, and other social categories. Many people show implicit preferences for racial ingroups over outgroups, associations between gender and career versus family, associations between age and competence, and associations between weight and laziness, among many others. Importantly, these implicit biases often exist in people who consciously endorse egalitarian values and explicitly reject prejudice, creating dissociations between conscious beliefs and automatic associations. The mechanisms generating implicit biases include exposure to cultural stereotypes through media, socialization, and observation, experiential learning from interactions with group members, and motivated cognition where self-interest shapes group evaluations. These biases develop gradually through experience, becoming automatic through repetition. Once established, they operate automatically, influencing perception, memory, judgment, and behavior without conscious awareness or intention. Implicit biases predict various outcomes, including less favorable evaluations of minority group members, differences in hiring recommendations, differences in medical treatment decisions, and differences in use of forced decisions in simulated scenarios. Meta-analyses show that implicit measures predict discriminatory behavior, though effect sizes are typically small and vary across contexts. The predictive validity of implicit measures has been debated, with critics arguing that effects are too small and inconsistent for practical applications, while proponents argue that even small biases accumulate across many decisions to produce substantial disparities. Dissociations between implicit and explicit attitudes exist, with people showing biases on implicit measures while denying those biases explicitly. These dissociations could reflect several possibilities. People have implicit biases they're unaware of. People are aware but unwilling to report biases. Different measurement methods tap different constructs. Or implicit measures reflect environmental associations rather than personal attitudes. Distinguishing these possibilities is challenging, and likely all contribute to observed dissociations in different people and contexts. Conscious control over implicit biases is limited. People cannot simply decide to not have biases and eliminate automatic associations through willpower. However, controlled processes can moderate expression of automatic biases. When motivated and able to control responses, people can override automatic biases, responding in egalitarian ways despite underlying automatic associations. Factors reducing control, time pressure, cognitive load, alcohol intoxication, increase bias expression, while factors enhancing control, motivation, accountability, awareness, reduce bias expression. Interventions to reduce implicit bias have had mixed success. Simple awareness of biases may increase motivation to control them, but doesn't eliminate underlying associations. Exposure to counter-stereotypical exemplars, encountering group members who violate stereotypes, can reduce automatic associations, though effects are often temporary. Practice with egalitarian responses can train new automatic associations that compete with biased associations. Mindfulness meditation has shown some promise in reducing implicit bias, possibly by increasing awareness of automatic thoughts and improving cognitive control. The malleability of implicit biases is debated. Some evidence suggests implicit biases are malleable, changing with contexts, motivations, and interventions, suggesting they reflect current mental states rather than stable traits. Other evidence suggests implicit biases are relatively stable, correlating over time and showing limited responsiveness to interventions, suggesting they reflect ingrained associations. The truth likely lies between extremes, with implicit biases showing both stability and malleability depending on which associations, time frames, and contexts are examined. Criticisms of implicit bias research include concerns about reliability. Some studies show weak test-retest correlations for IAT measures. Validity, questions about whether implicit measures assess what they claim to assess. And interpretation, whether IAT scores reflect personal biases versus mere knowledge of cultural stereotypes. Proponents respond that reliability is acceptable though not perfect, validity is supported by extensive research, and personal versus cultural distinction is somewhat artificial since internalized cultural associations influence behavior regardless of source. The practical implications of implicit bias research are significant. If biases operate unconsciously, interventions targeting only conscious attitudes will be insufficient. Effective bias reduction requires both changing automatic associations and improving control over automatic influences. Structural changes reducing opportunities for bias expression, blind review processes, standardized evaluation criteria, diverse decision-making committees may be more effective than individual-level interventions, though both are likely necessary. Understanding implicit bias has implications beyond prejudice reduction. It reveals more generally that automatic processes influence judgments and decisions in ways people don't recognize, raising questions about rationality, autonomy, and responsibility. If our judgments reflect unconscious influences we neither intend nor recognize, to what extent are we responsible for those judgments? These philosophical questions don't have simple answers but merit consideration as unconscious influence research advances. Sleep and dreams involve unconscious processing that may serve memory consolidation and emotional regulation. Sleep occupies approximately 1/3 of life, yet its functions remained mysterious until recently. Research has revealed that far from being passive rest, sleep involves active unconscious processing that consolidates memories, regulates emotions, and maintains brain function. Dreams, the vivid experiences during sleep, may reflect this unconscious processing or serve separate functions, with ongoing debate about dream functions. Memory consolidation during sleep has been demonstrated in numerous studies showing that sleep after learning improves memory compared to equivalent waking intervals. Declarative memories, facts, and events benefit from sleep, with particular benefit from slow-wave sleep dominating early night. Procedural memories, skills, and habits benefit especially from REM sleep dominating late night. Emotional memories may be preferentially consolidated, with emotional content remembered better than neutral content, potentially reflecting sleep's role in emotional regulation. The mechanisms of sleep-dependent memory consolidation involve reactivation of memories during sleep. Neurons active during learning reactivate during subsequent sleep, replaying learned patterns. This reactivation, occurring particularly during slow-wave sleep, may strengthen memories through repeated activation of neural patterns, integrate new memories with existing knowledge, and extract regularities from experiences. Disrupting reactivation impairs memory consolidation, confirming its importance. The synaptic homeostasis hypothesis proposes that waking strengthens synaptic connections through learning and experience, with synaptic weights increasing throughout waking. Sleep downscales synapses, renormalizing connection strengths to sustainable levels while preserving relative differences that encode memories. This process maintains neural network efficiency and prevents saturation while consolidating important information. Evidence includes findings that synaptic markers increase during waking and decrease during sleep, and that sleep deprivation causes attention deficits and learning impairments consistent with synaptic saturation. Emotional regulation during sleep may involve REM sleep preferentially. REM sleep processes emotional memories, reducing emotional intensity while preserving factual content, allowing memories to be recalled without overwhelming emotional reactions. This emotional dampening may depend on reduced norepinephrine during REM sleep. allowing amygdala reactivation without stress hormone release that would maintain emotional intensity. Consistent with this, sleep deprivation impairs emotional regulation, increasing emotional reactivity and reducing positive affect. Dreams, the vivid experiences during sleep, occur across sleep stages, but are most common, vivid, and bizarre during REM sleep. Dream content includes perceptual experiences, particularly visual imagery, motor experiences of moving, emotional experiences often more intense than waking, thoughts and memories though often fragmented, and social interactions with characters who may be familiar or unknown. The bizarreness of dreams, impossible events, discontinuities, lack of critical thinking, reflects altered brain chemistry and deactivated frontal regions during sleep. The function of dreaming is debated. Psychoanalytic theory proposed dreams reveal unconscious wishes and conflicts, requiring interpretation to access hidden meanings. But this view lacks empirical support and is largely abandoned by contemporary neuroscience. Modern theories propose dreams serve threat simulation, preparing for dangers by practicing responses in safe dream environments. Memory consolidation, processing experiences to strengthen learning. Emotional regulation, working through emotional concerns, or are simply epiphenomena, meaningless byproducts of neural activity during sleep without adaptive function. Evidence for threat simulation comes from content analyses showing dreams frequently involve threats, being chased, attacked, endangered, potentially allowing practice of threat responses. However, dreams also contain many non-threatening scenarios, and whether dream practice transfers to waking behavior is questionable. Evidence for memory processing includes incorporation of recent experiences into dreams and correlations between dream content and subsequent memory improvements, though establishing causal links is challenging. Lucid dreaming, awareness during dreams that one is dreaming, demonstrates that consciousness can persist during sleep with unusual characteristics. Lucid dreamers can control dream content intentionally, communicate from dreams using eye movements recorded on AIG, and reflect on dream experiences. Lucid dreaming occurs most commonly during REM sleep, but occasionally during non-REM sleep, suggesting that REM physiology permits waking-like consciousness more readily than non-REM physiology. Training can increase lucid dreaming frequency through various techniques, including reality testing during waking and maintaining awareness during sleep onset. Dream amnesia, forgetting most dreams upon awakening, is nearly universal, with people typically remembering 0 to 2 dreams nightly despite likely having 4 to 6 dreams. This amnesia may reflect neurochemical conditions during sleep preventing memory consolidation, lack of rehearsal and elaboration that strengthens waking memories, or interference from subsequent sleep stages or waking activities. Dream recall can be improved through intentions to remember, immediate recording upon awakening, and training, suggesting amnesia is not inevitable but reflects default processing. The content of dreams varies across individuals, cultures, ages, and contexts. Some themes are universal, being chased, falling, being naked in public, suggesting common concerns or brain activation patterns. Other content reflects personal experiences, concerns, and knowledge, though transformed and recombined in novel ways. External stimuli can incorporate into dreams, alarm clocks becoming dream phones, pressure on body becoming dream sensations, demonstrating that sensory processing continues during sleep, though usually not reaching consciousness. Nightmares, disturbing dreams causing awakening, occur occasionally in most people, but frequently in some, particularly those with anxiety, depression, or trauma. Nightmares may reflect dysregulated emotional processing during sleep, with threatening content overwhelming regulatory processes. Treatments including imagery rehearsal therapy, where people rehearse modified versions of nightmares during waking, can reduce nightmare frequency, suggesting some conscious control over unconscious sleep processes is possible. The neuroscience of dreaming involves deactivated dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, reducing executive function and critical thinking, deactivated posterior parietal cortex, reducing spatial processing, activated visual cortex, generating imagery, activated amygdala and anterior cingulate, generating emotions, and altered neurochemistry with high acetylcholine, low norepinephrine, and low serotonin. This pattern explains dreams' visual vividness, emotional intensity, logical inconsistency, and amnesia upon awakening. Unconscious inferences construct perceptual experiences from ambiguous sensory input. Perception feels like direct awareness of the external world, but it actually involves extensive unconscious processing constructing experiences from ambiguous, incomplete sensory signals. The brain unconsciously makes inferences about what stimuli likely caused sensory input, creating perceptual experiences that go far beyond raw data. Understanding these unconscious inferences reveals both the sophistication of perceptual systems and their vulnerabilities to illusions. Hermann von Helmholtz proposed unconscious inference in the 19th century, arguing that perception involves interpreting sensory data based on prior experience and knowledge. Sensory input is ambiguous. Infinite possible external configurations could produce identical retinal images, so perceptual systems unconsciously infer the most likely interpretation. This framework anticipates modern Bayesian approaches to perception, which formalize unconscious inference as probability calculations combining sensory evidence with prior expectations. Visual illusions demonstrate unconscious inference. The Mueller-Lyer illusion, two equal lines appearing different lengths because of different arrowhead configurations, reflects unconscious inference about depth. The arrowheads suggest depth relationships like inside versus outside corners, with perceptual systems unconsciously inferring different three-dimensional interpretations and adjusting perceived lengths accordingly. Knowing the illusion doesn't eliminate it, because unconscious inference operates automatically, generating perceptual experiences that consciousness cannot override through knowledge. The Ames room creates dramatic size illusions through perspective distortion. The room appears rectangular, but is actually trapezoidal, with one corner much closer to viewers than the other. Two people of equal height appear vastly different sizes when standing in opposite corners, violating expectations. This illusion works because unconscious inference assumes rooms are rectangular, leading to incorrect size judgments. The assumption of rectangular rooms reflects regularities in normal environments being incorporated into perceptual processing. Perceptual completion fills in missing information unconsciously. The blind spot, where the optic nerve exits the retina leaving no photoreceptors, creates a gap in visual fields, yet we don't experience blank spots. The brain unconsciously fills in the blind spot with patterns from surrounding areas, creating seamless visual experiences. Similarly, occluded objects are perceived as complete despite only parts being visible, with perceptual systems unconsciously inferring hidden portions based on visible fragments and regularities. Depth perception from monocular cues involves unconscious inference. Two-dimensional retinal images provide cues like occlusion, perspective, shading, and texture gradients that are unconsciously interpreted as three-dimensional structure. These cues are ambiguous. Multiple depth configurations could produce identical cues, but perceptual systems select interpretations based on prior experience and assumptions. The resulting depth perceptions are automatic, not requiring conscious reasoning about perspective geometry. Motion perception involves unconscious inference about object trajectories. The visual system tracks objects unconsciously, predicting future positions and generating motion experiences. Illusory motion, perceived movement where there is none, demonstrates unconscious inference. The waterfall illusion, after viewing downward motion, stationary scenes appear to move upward, reflects adaptation in motion-sensitive neurons, creating imbalances that are unconsciously interpreted as upward motion. Figure ground segregation, determining which regions are objects versus background, involves unconscious inference based on cues like surrounds, convexity, symmetry, and size. Ambiguous figures like the Rubin vase, interpretable as either white vase or black faces, demonstrate that sensory input doesn't uniquely determine interpretation. Perception alternates between interpretations unconsciously, with one interpretation dominating for seconds before switching. The switching occurs automatically without conscious control, revealing unconscious dynamics underlying perceptual organization. Perceptual constancies, perceiving object properties as stable despite varying sensory input, involve unconscious compensation for viewing conditions. Size constancy makes objects appear constant size despite varying retinal image sizes with distance. Color constancy makes objects appear constant color despite varying illumination. Shape constancy makes objects appear constant shape despite varying perspectives. These constancies reflect unconscious inference about object properties versus viewing conditions, separating intrinsic properties from extrinsic factors. Top-down effects demonstrate that expectations influence perception unconsciously. Ambiguous stimuli are perceived differently depending on context. A scrawled character is perceived as B in The Cat, but as 13 in 1214, demonstrating that context unconsciously influences perception. Reading errors where expected words are perceived instead of actual words, reading "the where was written," similarly demonstrate that expectations unconsciously influence perception. Perceptual learning improves discrimination through experience, with expertise altering what is consciously perceived. Experts see details novices miss. Radiologists detect abnormalities in X-rays that look normal to untrained viewers, because learning has tuned perceptual systems to task-relevant features. This tuning occurs largely unconsciously through experience, with experts often unable to articulate what they're detecting or how they're discriminating stimuli. The predictive processing framework proposes perception as hierarchical unconscious inference, where higher levels predict lower-level activity, with mismatches, prediction errors, propagating upward to update models. Perception emerges from minimizing prediction errors across hierarchical levels, with conscious experience reflecting high-level predictions rather than raw sensory data. This framework explains top-down effects, perceptual constancies, and attention, unifying diverse phenomena under a single computational principle. Synesthesia, cross-modal experiences where stimulation in one modality produces experiences in another, may reflect reduced inhibition between sensory systems or additional connections allowing cross-activation. grapheme color synesthetes automatically experience specific colors for letters and numbers, with consistency over decades. These experiences are automatic, unconscious, and unavoidable, demonstrating that unusual connectivity can create qualitatively different perceptual experiences. Intuition and gut feelings reflect unconscious processing of complex information patterns. People sometimes make decisions based on intuitions or gut feelings, subjective senses that certain options are right or wrong without conscious reasoning. These intuitions can be remarkably accurate, leading to better decisions than deliberate analysis, but can also mislead when based on biases or incomplete information. Understanding intuition requires understanding how unconscious processing extracts patterns and generates feelings that guide behavior. Expert intuition develops through extensive experience, allowing rapid pattern recognition. Chess masters recognize thousands of board positions and know strong moves intuitively without conscious calculation. Medical experts diagnose patients intuitively, sensing problems without consciously reviewing all symptoms. These intuitions reflect unconscious pattern recognition from experience, with similar situations encountered previously activating associated knowledge automatically. Recognition-primed decision-making describes how experts make rapid decisions under time pressure. Rather than comparing options systematically, experts recognize situations as similar to previous experiences and retrieve associated actions. A firefighter sees smoke patterns and intuitively knows how fire is spreading without consciously reasoning about combustion physics. An experienced driver senses dangerous situations and reacts before consciously analyzing threats. This recognition-based intuition allows rapid, effective responses when deliberate analysis would be too slow. The adaptive unconscious, proposed by Timothy Wilson, refers to unconscious processes that evolve to handle complex information processing tasks efficiently. These processes detect patterns, make predictions, and guide behavior automatically, operating in parallel with conscious thought, but often more rapidly and efficiently. Conscious reasoning excels at logical analysis and novel problems, but is slow and limited. Unconscious processing excels at pattern recognition and complex judgments, but operates opaquely, generating intuitions without explaining why. Deliberation without attention effects reportedly show that unconscious thought sometimes produces better decisions than conscious deliberation. Studies claimed that for complex decisions like choosing apartments or cars, brief consideration followed by distraction produces better choices than extensive deliberation. The proposed mechanism was that unconscious thought processes complex information better than conscious thought's limited capacity. However, these findings largely failed to replicate, suggesting the effect was not robust or was smaller than initially believed. Thin slicing refers to making accurate judgments from minimal information, thin slices of behavior. Studies show that brief observations, seconds or minutes, sometimes predict outcomes as well as extensive information. Teachers rated after brief video clips receive similar student evaluations as after semester-long courses. Speed dating decisions based on minutes of conversation predict relationship interest as well as extended dates. These findings suggest unconscious processing rapidly extracts relevant information from minimal cues. However, thin slicing can mislead when quick judgments reflect biases rather than valid cues. First impressions based on appearance predict later judgments, but not necessarily actual competence or character. Attractive people receive more favorable evaluations across domains, reflecting bias rather than valid inference. Thin slicing is most accurate when judges have extensive experience allowing calibrated intuitions, and when cues validly predict outcomes rather than reflecting biases. The effect heuristic describes using emotional responses as information for judgments. People judge risks and benefits inversely. Options evoking positive feelings are judged low risk and high benefit, while options evoking negative feelings are judged high risk and low benefit, even when actual risk and benefit are independent. Nuclear power evokes negative feelings and is judged risky and low benefit, while solar power evokes positive feelings and is judged safe and beneficial, despite both having risks and benefits. The affect heuristic operates unconsciously, with emotional responses influencing judgments without awareness of the influence. Feeling of knowing, subjective sense of whether unrecalled information could be recognized, reflects unconscious memory access. Asked questions they cannot answer, people accurately judge whether they would recognize answers if presented. This feeling of knowing correlates with partial memory activation, too weak for recall, but sufficient for recognition. The feeling emerges unconsciously from memory system activity, providing metacognitive monitoring without conscious access to memory contents. The fluency heuristic uses processing ease as information. Easily processed stimuli, fluent processing, are judged more positively, more familiar, and more true than disfluently processed stimuli. Readable fonts increase judged truth compared to difficult fonts. Repeated statements are judged more true than novel statements, illusory truth effect, because repetition increases fluency. These effects occur unconsciously, with fluency influencing judgments without awareness that processing ease rather than validity drives responses. Analysis paralysis, decision quality degrading with excessive deliberation, occurs when conscious analysis disrupts effective intuitive processing. Choosing preferred posters, deliberating reduces later satisfaction compared to choosing intuitively, possibly because deliberation focuses on verbalizable attributes that poorly predict actual preferences. For complex multidimensional decisions, intuitive holistic processing may sometimes outperform conscious analysis, dissecting options into attributes and losing emergent patterns. Trusting intuition versus deliberation depends on domain, expertise, and context. In domains where patterns exist and feedback allows learning, whether forecasting, chess, medical diagnosis, expert intuition is often superior to deliberation. In domains lacking patterns or where biases distort intuitions, predicting human behavior, economic forecasts, intuition misleads and statistical analysis outperforms judgment. Distinguishing when to trust intuition requires metacognitive awareness of these contingencies. The unconscious mind influences creativity through incubation and insight processes. Creative breakthroughs often arrive unexpectedly after periods away from problems, suggesting unconscious processing contributes to creativity. The classic image of insights occurring during relaxation, Archimedes in his bath, Newton under an apple tree, suggests unconscious incubation leading to sudden conscious illumination. Understanding how unconscious processes support creativity reveals the interplay between conscious and unconscious thought in problem-solving and innovation. Incubation effects, improvements in problem-solving following breaks, have been demonstrated in numerous studies. Participants working on difficult problems show better performance after breaks compared to continuous work, particularly for insight problems requiring restructuring initial problem representations. The breaks need not involve thinking about problems. Indeed, distraction by unrelated tasks sometimes produces better incubation than continued conscious thought. This suggests unconscious processes continue working during breaks, exploring solution spaces inaccessible to conscious thought. The mechanisms underlying incubation remain debated. One hypothesis is that unconscious processing continues during breaks, exploring associations and combinations that conscious thought missed. Spreading activation in semantic networks might continue unconsciously, eventually activating relevant concepts that break impasses. Another hypothesis is that breaks allow forgetting of misleading approaches that trapped conscious thought, enabling fresh perspectives when returning to problems. A third hypothesis combines both. Breaks allow both unconscious exploration and forgetting of fixations. Insight experiences, sudden realizations where solutions appear complete in consciousness, feel qualitatively different from gradual problem solving. Brain imaging during insight shows distinctive patterns, including reduced activity in prefrontal regions and increased activity in right hemisphere temporal areas. The reduced prefrontal activity may reflect releasing cognitive control that constrained thinking, allowing unconscious associations to reach consciousness. Sudden gamma band activity bursts precede insight reports, possibly reflecting binding of solution elements into coherent wholes. The remote associates test, where participants find words linking three probe words, demonstrates unconscious processing facilitating insights. Participants often report sudden insights where solutions appear without knowing how they arrived. Priming with solution words improves performance even when primes are subliminal, demonstrating unconscious activation of solution-relevant concepts. Before conscious insight, participants show physiological responses to solutions, suggesting unconscious recognition precedes conscious awareness. Divergent thinking, generating many solutions to open-ended problems, benefits from reduced conscious control. Instructions to brainstorm freely produce more creative solutions than instructions to generate only practical solutions, possibly because reduced evaluation allows unusual associations to emerge. Mind-wandering and daydreaming, states of reduced executive control, sometimes facilitate creativity, with creative ideas arising spontaneously during unrelated activities. However, some conscious control remains necessary to recognize valuable ideas among many generated unconsciously. The relationship between conscious and unconscious contributions to creativity varies across domains and individuals. Some creative work requires extensive conscious preparation, acquiring domain knowledge, developing skills, before unconscious processes can generate innovations. In domains requiring technical knowledge like science or engineering, unconscious insights must be verified through conscious analysis to separate promising ideas from dead ends. In artistic domains, unconscious generation may play larger roles with less conscious verification needed. Sleep and dreaming may facilitate creativity through unconscious processing during sleep. Dreams sometimes incorporate elements from waking problems, recombining them in novel ways that inspire solutions. Studies show that REM sleep improves performance on creative tasks more than non-REM sleep or waking rest, suggesting REM's associative processing facilitates creativity. However, dream-inspired solutions require waking evaluation to determine viability, as dreams' reduced critical thinking produces many implausible ideas alongside occasional insights. The unconscious thought theory proposed that unconscious processing handles complex decisions better than conscious thought, but this broad claim has not held up well to scrutiny. While unconscious processing contributes to some aspects of creativity and complex judgment, conscious thought remains crucial for planning, evaluation, implementation, and refinement. The most creative work typically involves iterative cycles of conscious preparation and effort, unconscious incubation, and conscious evaluation and development of emergent ideas. Individual differences in creativity may partly reflect differences in unconscious processing. Some people report more frequent spontaneous insights, possibly reflecting more efficient unconscious pattern recognition or reduced inhibition, allowing unusual associations to reach consciousness. Working memory capacity shows complex relationships with creativity. Moderate capacity may be optimal, providing sufficient resources for conscious work while not suppressing unconscious contributions through excessive control. Unconscious body regulation maintains homeostasis through continuous monitoring and adjustment. While conscious awareness focuses on external events and deliberate actions, unconscious processes continuously regulate internal body states, maintaining temperature, blood pressure, blood chemistry, and countless other parameters within narrow ranges necessary for survival. This homeostatic regulation operates entirely outside awareness, demonstrating the sophistication of unconscious physiological control systems that evolved long before consciousness. The autonomic nervous system, controlling heart rate, breathing, digestion, and other visceral functions, operates unconsciously, adjusting physiology to meet changing demands. The sympathetic division activates during stress or exertion, increasing heart rate, redirecting blood flow to muscles, and mobilizing energy stores. The parasympathetic division activates during rest, slowing heart rate, promoting digestion, and conserving energy. These reciprocal systems balance each other, maintaining appropriate physiological states without conscious intervention. Breathing occurs automatically through brainstem circuits that generate rhythmic motor patterns, driving respiratory muscles. These circuits adjust breathing rate and depth unconsciously based on blood oxygen and carbon dioxide levels detected by chemoreceptors. During exercise, breathing automatically increases to meet elevated oxygen demands and remove accumulated carbon dioxide. During sleep, breathing continues unconsciously despite reduced consciousness. Conscious control can temporarily override automatic breathing, holding breath or voluntary hyperventilation, but automatic control resumes when attention lapses. Cardiovascular regulation maintains blood pressure and cardiac output through unconscious feedback loops. Baroreceptors detect blood pressure changes, triggering reflex adjustments in heart rate and vessel diameter to maintain pressure within appropriate ranges. When standing from lying position, blood pressure drops due to gravity, triggering rapid compensatory responses that restore pressure before consciousness notices any change. Failure of these unconscious regulatory systems causes orthostatic hypotension, dizziness upon standing, demonstrating their importance. Temperature regulation maintains body temperature near 37 degrees Celsius through unconscious mechanisms, including adjusting blood flow to skin, sweating, shivering, and metabolic rate changes. When cold, unconscious systems constrict blood vessels, reducing heat loss, trigger shivering, generating heat through muscle activity, and increase metabolic rate. When hot, Systems dilate blood vessels, increasing heat loss, trigger sweating for evaporative cooling, and decrease activity. These adjustments occur automatically without conscious decisions. Glucose regulation maintains blood sugar within narrow ranges through complex unconscious hormonal systems. After eating, rising blood glucose triggers insulin release from pancreas, promoting glucose uptake by cells and storage as glycogen. Between meals, declining glucose triggers glucagon release, promoting glycogen breakdown and glucose release. These hormonal adjustments occur unconsciously, maintaining stable glucose availability for brain and other tissues. Diabetes results from dysfunction in these unconscious regulatory systems. Hunger and satiety signals arise from unconscious monitoring of energy stores and gut contents. Multiple hormones, including ghrelin, leptin, and insulin, convey information about energy status to brain circuits that regulate appetite and food intake. These signals influence subjective feelings of hunger and satiety that reach consciousness, but the monitoring and signaling processes are unconscious. Eating behavior reflects both these unconscious signals and conscious decisions influenced by external cues, habits, and social contexts. Sleep-wake regulation involves unconscious circadian rhythms, approximately 24-hour cycles synchronized to day-night cycles, and homeostatic sleep drive that increases with time awake. The suprachiasmatic nucleus in hypothalamus generates circadian rhythms, with light input from eyes synchronizing rhythms to external time. Sleep drive accumulates during waking through adenosine buildup and dissipates during sleep. These unconscious systems create feelings of alertness and sleepiness that influence behavior, though conscious decisions can override them temporarily. Pain perception, while consciously experienced, involves substantial unconscious processing. Nociceptors detect tissue damage and send signals to spinal cord and brain, but these signals undergo extensive unconscious modulation before reaching consciousness. Descending pathways from brain can amplify or suppress pain signals, with suppression occurring during emergencies when pain might impair survival. Placebo analgesia, pain reduction from inactive treatments, demonstrates that unconscious expectations can modulate pain perception, with brain imaging showing reduced activity in pain processing regions after placebos. The immune system operates entirely unconsciously, detecting and responding to pathogens through complex cellular and molecular mechanisms. Multiple cell types patrol tissues and blood, recognizing foreign molecules, engulfing and destroying pathogens, and coordinating inflammatory responses. These processes occur continuously without awareness, only producing conscious symptoms like fever or pain when responses are strong enough to affect consciousness. The sophistication of unconscious immune recognition, distinguishing self from non-self among millions of possible molecules, rivals any conscious cognitive process. Unconscious social perception rapidly evaluates people and situations to guide social behavior. Social interactions require rapid processing of others' intentions, emotions, and social status to guide appropriate responses. Much of this social perception occurs unconsciously, allowing quick navigation of complex social environments. Understanding unconscious social processing reveals how first impressions form, how we read others' emotions, and how social biases influence interactions outside awareness. First impressions form rapidly and unconsciously, with judgments of trustworthiness, competence, and attractiveness occurring within milliseconds of seeing faces. These rapid judgments show remarkable consistency across perceivers and predict important outcomes, including election results. Candidates judged more competent from brief face exposures are more likely to win. The evolutionary basis for rapid social evaluation is clear. Quickly assessing whether others are threats or allies had survival value, selecting for efficient, unconscious mechanisms. Face processing involves specialized brain regions, including fusiform face area, that responds selectively to faces. Superior temporal sulcus processing changeable facial features like eye gaze and expression, and amygdala evaluating emotional and social significance. These regions operate largely unconsciously, rapidly extracting social information from facial features. Damage to these regions impairs face perception, with prosopagnosia, face blindness, preventing conscious face recognition despite intact general vision, demonstrating specialized unconscious face processing. Emotion recognition from facial expressions occurs rapidly and largely unconsciously. People categorize expressions into basic emotions: happiness, sadness, anger, fear, surprise, disgust, within hundreds of milliseconds, faster than conscious reflection. Micro-expressions, brief involuntary expressions, can be detected unconsciously, influencing judgments even when not consciously perceived. Cross-cultural research shows universality in expression production and recognition, suggesting innate unconscious emotion processing systems. Theory of mind, inferring others' mental states, involves both conscious and unconscious components. Rapid, automatic mentalizing occurs unconsciously when observing others' behavior, with brain regions including temporoparietal junction automatically attributing intentions and beliefs. More complex theory of mind reasoning, understanding false beliefs, detecting deception, reasoning about nested mental states, requires conscious thought, but initial automatic attribution provides foundation. Mimicry and behavioral synchrony occur unconsciously during social interactions. People automatically adopt similar postures, gestures, and speech patterns as interaction partners, a phenomenon called the chameleon effect. This unconscious mimicry facilitates rapport and liking, with greater mimicry correlating with smoother interactions. Mirror neurons, active during both performing and observing actions, may mediate mimicry, though their exact role remains debated. Social categorization, classifying people by gender, race, age, and other characteristics, occurs automatically and unconsciously, with categorization affecting subsequent processing and judgments. Categorization can occur from minimal cues and despite conscious intentions to avoid categorizing. Once categorized, stereotype-consistent information is preferentially processed and remembered, perpetuating stereotypes even when experiencing stereotype-inconsistent information. Attractiveness judgments, though feeling subjective and conscious, reflect unconscious processing of multiple cues including facial symmetry, averageness, sexual dimorphism, and skin quality. These features are processed unconsciously and integrated into overall attractiveness judgments that influence social interactions. Attractive people receive preferential treatment across many domains. They're judged more intelligent, trustworthy, and competent, hired more often, and treated more leniently by legal systems, demonstrating unconscious beauty biases affecting important outcomes. Body language and nonverbal communication convey substantial information processed largely unconsciously. Postures, gestures, proxemics, interpersonal distances, and paralinguistic features like voice tone and timing communicate emotions, intentions, and social status. People read these cues unconsciously, forming impressions and adjusting behavior accordingly. Cultural differences in nonverbal communication can lead to misunderstandings when unconscious expectations from one culture misinterpret cues from another. Social influence operates partly through unconscious mechanisms. Conformity, adjusting behavior to match group norms, occurs automatically in many situations, with people unconsciously adopting group behaviors without awareness of influence. Obedience to authority involves unconscious deference to status signals, including uniforms, titles, and confident demeanor. Persuasion techniques exploit unconscious processes, including reciprocity, feeling obligated to return favors, scarcity, valuing limited resources, and social proof, following others' behavior. If sleep has found you somewhere in this exploration of the subconscious mind, of automatic processes and implicit memories, of unconscious biases and intuitive judgments, of emotional undercurrents and perceptual constructions, of creative insights and social perceptions, then rest knowing these hidden processes continue operating, guiding thoughts and behaviors outside awareness. If you're still awake, there's more to discover about the mind beneath consciousness. While you sleep tonight, your subconscious doesn't rest. It consolidates the day's experiences, replaying neural patterns that encode memories, integrating new information with existing knowledge, extracting regularities that will guide future behavior. The sleeping brain is active, processing, organizing, preparing for tomorrow's challenges through mechanisms operating entirely outside awareness. Dreams may emerge, strange narratives generated by neural activity freed from the constraints of sensory input and executive control, following their own logic that makes sense during sleep but seems bizarre upon waking. Your automatic habits continue shaping behavior even as conscious control withdraws. The bedtime routine, brushing teeth, arranging pillows, adopting familiar sleep positions, proceeds automatically, requiring minimal attention. These routines were once deliberate, but became automatic through repetition, illustrating how the subconscious takes over well-practiced behaviors, freeing consciousness for novelty. Tomorrow morning, the alarm will trigger another cascade of automatic behaviors, shutting it off, stumbling toward coffee, checking phone, all executed with minimal conscious thought. The subconscious holds biases, associations, emotional responses formed through experience and culture, influencing tomorrow's perceptions, judgments, and behaviors in ways you may not recognize. These influences operate automatically, shaping interactions, decisions, and feelings without announcing themselves to conscious awareness. When you meet someone new, unconscious processes will evaluate them within milliseconds. Are they trustworthy? Attractive? Competent, based on facial features, body language, and countless subtle cues, forming first impressions that conscious thought may rationalize but didn't create. The unconscious solves problems, generates insights, produces creative ideas that sometimes arrive in consciousness, fully formed as if from nowhere. Scientists and artists have long reported solutions emerging during sleep, rest, or distraction after periods of conscious effort. The subconscious continues working when consciousness disengages, processing information through different mechanisms, potentially seeing solutions conscious analysis missed. Tomorrow you might recall a solution to today's problem, emerging spontaneously as if by magic, though actually reflecting unconscious processing during sleep. Your sense of continuous self, maintained through waking, depends partly on unconscious processes that preserve identity despite constant change in thoughts, perceptions, and circumstances. Memory systems automatically maintain continuity, connecting present to past, creating the narrative that feels like a unified you persisting through time. Yet this continuity is partly construction, not absolute. The self is assembled moment by moment, with memories edited, updated, sometimes fabricated, creating coherence where fragmentation exists. The boundary between conscious and unconscious is not fixed but permeable, with information flowing between domains. Conscious attention can sometimes illuminate unconscious processes, bringing automatic habits into awareness, allowing modification. Meditation and mindfulness practices cultivate this awareness, observing thoughts and reactions that normally operate automatically, creating space for choice where automaticity previously dominated. You might notice tomorrow how often you act automatically, driven by habits and impulses rather than conscious decisions. Yet much remains necessarily unconscious. The computational complexity of perception, language, skilled movement, and countless other processes exceeds conscious capacity. The subconscious handles this complexity efficiently, presenting to consciousness only summaries, outcomes, and anomalies requiring attention. This division of labor allows the limited capacity of consciousness to focus on what matters, while the vast subconscious handles routine operations. Without this unconscious support, you would be overwhelmed by the complexity of even simple tasks. Understanding the subconscious reveals the complexity of mental life, the limitations of introspection, and the importance of both conscious and unconscious processes working together. You are not purely rational deliberators consciously choosing all actions, nor are you mere automata blindly following unconscious impulses. You are both integrated systems where conscious and unconscious processes interact, sometimes cooperating, sometimes conflicting, creating the rich mental lives we experience. The subconscious shapes who you are in profound ways, the skills you've automatized, the memories you've formed implicitly, the biases you've acquired, the intuitions you've developed, the emotional associations you carry. These unconscious influences don't make you less autonomous, but reveal that autonomy involves both conscious and unconscious contributions. Recognizing unconscious influences isn't limiting, but empowering, allowing you to understand forces shaping behavior and potentially modify them through conscious intervention. The next time you catch yourself performing actions automatically, or holding beliefs you can't consciously justify, or feeling emotions that seem to arise unbidden, or making decisions based on intuitions you can't explain, remember the subconscious at work. This hidden mind shapes much of who you are and how you behave, operating beneath awareness yet profoundly influential. It's not separate from you, but an integral part of your mental architecture, evolved over millions of years to handle the enormous computational demands of living. The exploration of the subconscious reveals how much occurs outside awareness, how limited conscious access is to our own mental processes, and how the mind extends far beyond what consciousness can observe. Each moment involves vast unconscious processing, presenting only filtered results to consciousness, which then narrates experiences as if it were in control, when actually it receives outputs from systems it cannot directly access. This doesn't diminish the importance of consciousness, but properly situates it within the larger context of mental function. See you next time.